The party was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the moment my world tilted. My name is Morgan Hayes, and I had just started my dream job, my first day, the inauguration party for the new executive team. The champagne was flowing, the music upbeat, the air full of congratulations. Then she turned to me, sharp as a blade, and said, "You're fired." Laughter rippled through the room. I froze, not from fear, but from disbelief. Not because of the words, but because she assumed she had power over me in a room full of witnesses. I didn't answer. I didn't argue. I smiled. Inside, a plan began to take shape. Everyone else murmured, unsure if this was a joke. The HR rep shuffled nervously, my coworkers exchanged glances. But I understood what had just happened. This wasn't about incompetence, it was about control. She wanted to humiliate me, assert dominance, make me feel small on the very first day. And, like a perfectly executed opening in chess, she exposed her arrogance. Because arrogance is predictable, and predictability can be exploited. That night, as the music played and the guests laughed, I started calculating every step to turn her attack into my advantage. Once the party ended, I walked quietly to my car, letting her words echo in my mind. Not in fear, but like a trigger. I reviewed everything I knew about her habits, her decisions, her network, her overconfidence. She had underestimated me completely, and underestimation is the perfect weapon. I could have stormed back, confronted her, made a scene, but that would be foolish. True power, I reminded myself, is subtle, patient, observed, and revenge, when executed with precision, is far more devastating than anger. That evening, I started quietly digging through company policies, contracts, and the executive handbook. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just the kind of knowledge that gives the observant person leverage over the reckless. I began mapping her weaknesses, the ways she made decisions impulsively, the small procedural errors she overlooked. Every laugh she had shared at my expense became a reference point. Every sneer, every pointed remark, every jab at my inexperience would soon serve as proof. She didn't anticipate I would be smarter, faster, and more methodical than she ever imagined. The next morning, I arrived earlier than anyone else. The office was quiet, buzzing only with the soft hum of computers and the occasional clatter of keys. I observed her from across the floor. She was reviewing the same contracts she had proudly presented at the party. Each overconfident gesture, each impatient sigh, each casual glance at employees as if to remind them who ruled, was recorded mentally. I didn't move aggressively. I didn't confront her. I let her underestimate me, as she had done to countless employees before me. Patience, I reminded myself, is the deadliest weapon. 3 hours later, a small but critical error appeared in the quarterly projections she had signed off on. Most would have ignored it. Most would have blamed the system. I quietly flagged it to the accounting team, ensuring the issue was documented and corrected. My actions appeared helpful and professional to others, but in reality, they were the first strike. Her credibility began to fracture, not through confrontation, but through undeniable truth. The colleagues who once smiled at her dominance began to notice cracks in the facade. I smiled. She had no idea the opening gambit had succeeded. Over the next week, I subtly amplified these cracks. Every minor procedural misstep she made, every oversight, was quietly noted, verified, and gently highlighted to HR or other executives, not in accusation but as guidance, so it appeared like professional diligence rather than personal vendetta. Each small revelation sowed doubt in her competence, while I maintained the guise of calm professionalism. The room's power dynamics began shifting quietly, almost imperceptibly. Her aura of authority, the one she assumed was untouchable, started showing the tiniest fractures. Meanwhile, she continued to underestimate me. Meetings became her stage, where she displayed her authority. I observed, waited, and prepared. My every email was precise, my every report flawless. I didn't argue, I didn't provoke. I didn't overstep, but I collected ammunition, documentation of errors, proof of impulsive decisions, and instances of favoritism. The more she flexed her perceived power, the more material I gathered. Patience became my ally, and every small step moved me closer to the moment where her first-day arrogance would meet its inevitable undoing. By the end of the second week, whispers had started circulating among other employees. Questions about her decisions, the gaps in her reports, the subtle errors she made, the same errors I had quietly flagged, began to gain traction. She remained unaware of the true source of the attention. I continued to act helpful, calm, and professional, hiding the fact that each minor revelation was a controlled domino in a chain reaction I was orchestrating. The first hour of her first day may have been meant to humiliate me, but by now I knew the real victory would arrive when arrogance collided with precision. The third week brought opportunity. A major client meeting had been scheduled, one she had spent hours preparing for, but she overlooked a key contract clause. I had anticipated this possibility and quietly reviewed the documents ahead of time. During the meeting, when the error surfaced, I remained calm, offering a correction framed as helpful insight. The client nodded in agreement, impressed with my precision, while she faltered, stammering for control. The first significant public crack in her authority was undeniable, and I could see the panic behind her composed facade. After the meeting, I documented everything: emails, confirmations, and reactions from the client. Each piece of evidence became another layer of leverage. I didn't gloat, I didn't whisper. I simply acted professional, composed, and helpful, reinforcing the contrast between her faltering confidence and my quiet competence. The office had begun noticing. Colleagues, previously silent, started giving me subtle acknowledgement. She, meanwhile, remained unaware that every misstep she made, every mistake she thought insignificant, was feeding a slow, inevitable reversal. I began planting procedural observations, minor policy reminders, and strategic suggestions directly to HR and the executive board, always framed as helpful guidance, never accusation. My boss saw only assistance, not a pattern forming against her. Meanwhile, whispers circulated among staff. Morgan Hayes is thorough. Morgan Hayes is meticulous. And suddenly the narrative shifted. I was no longer the first-day victim. I was the calm force that had spotted errors no one else could, subtly undermining her authority without confrontation. The fourth week, I leveraged scheduling errors and overlooked approvals, timing each correction to demonstrate competence without appearing opportunistic. Meetings were mine to observe, and every miscalculation she made was quietly flagged and resolved. Others noticed, and her confidence visibly declined. The board began asking questions about the discrepancies she had missed. She tried to maintain control, but her impulsive responses and defensiveness only highlighted the contrast between her panic and my composure. The slow dismantling of her authority was working perfectly. By now, the whispers reached her ears. She tried to confront me, accusing me of undermining her. I remained calm, smiling politely, and reminded her that my actions were simply helping the company. Every word she spoke revealed insecurity, impatience, and desperation. Each outburst only strengthened my case and exposed her instability to HR and the board. The power she had assumed was hers by default was slipping through her fingers, all without me raising my voice. Precision, patience, and timing had become my allies, and the victory was near. The final trigger approached, a critical contract that required approval before the next quarter. She rushed through the documents, overconfident and distracted. I reviewed quietly, flagged a subtle but crucial oversight, and documented the interaction with email confirmation. The board immediately noticed, and she was forced to acknowledge her error publicly. My careful, patient orchestration had finally begun delivering visible consequences. 3 weeks in, she had gone from authority to faltering under scrutiny, and I had done it all without confrontation, just quiet, deliberate action. By the 5th week, the momentum was undeniable. Minor errors had grown into patterns that the board and HR could no longer ignore. I began submitting formal observations, framed as professional diligence, that highlighted her repeated oversights. She tried to argue, to explain, to reclaim authority, but each attempt only confirmed her instability. I stayed calm, composed, and helpful. Every email and memo a calculated move. My boss had no idea she was being dismantled, not with anger, but with precision and patience. The team noticed. Colleagues began subtly aligning with me, seeking guidance and validation. I remained courteous, never overstepping, letting my competence speak for itself. She, meanwhile, was visibly rattled. Meetings became tense, her voice sharp and defensive. Her confident gestures began to waver. Every overreaction, every panic became evidence that my patient strategy was succeeding. Her authority, once assumed untouchable, was crumbling quietly before the eyes of everyone who mattered. Then came the critical escalation. A high-stakes contract, overlooked due to her rush and distractions, was about to be signed. I flagged the problem with impeccable documentation and procedural correctness. The board immediately intervened. She was forced to acknowledge her oversight in front of key executives. The humiliation was subtle, professional, undeniable. I didn't celebrate. I simply noted the result. The dominoes were falling. Her arrogance, which had defined her first day, was now the very force driving her downfall. Over the next few days, minor staff inquiries revealed more oversights she had attempted to hide. HR approached me privately, expressing relief that someone had been paying attention to detail. I remained calm, letting the recognition grow naturally. The narrative had shifted entirely. I was no longer the fired employee on day one. I had become the quietly competent, reliable force the company relied upon, and she, once dominant and feared, was scrambling to maintain relevance in a game she didn't understand had already begun. By the end of the month, her first-day arrogance had fully collided with reality. Emails from the board requested clarifications on issues she had mishandled. Colleagues whispered about the new authority quietly emerging in the office. She attempted confrontations, attempts to undermine me, but each move only documented her instability further. I had transformed every insult, every public humiliation, and every assumption of her control into evidence of competence, leverage, and inevitability. The quiet revenge was almost complete. Finally, the decisive action arrived. I submitted a comprehensive report highlighting repeated oversights and procedural violations, carefully verified and framed as professional duty. The board's response was immediate. My boss was formally reprimanded and placed under supervision, her authority effectively curtailed. The woman who had declared me fired 3 hours after her arrival now had no power to act without oversight. And as I returned to my desk, calm and composed, I realized that patience, precision, and silent strategy had achieved what confrontation never could. Weeks later, my boss's behavior was scrutinized at every turn. Colleagues who had once feared her now approached me for guidance. The first-day firing comment, the insult meant to assert dominance, had long been forgotten by everyone except me. It had fueled the meticulous, patient strategy that now left her struggling under supervision. Every minor slip she made was quietly noted, documented, and leveraged. The office balance had shifted completely, and my quiet rise to authority was undeniable. The board formally reassigned responsibilities I had previously only observed. Projects she had claimed as her own were now managed under my oversight. She tried to protest, claiming experience and authority, but the evidence was absolute. Emails, memos, procedural corrections, all carefully documented, left her arguments ineffective. She realized too late that her first-hour arrogance had set the stage for her downfall. The humiliation was not public spectacle, it was precise, inescapable, and professional. Even colleagues noticed the change. Those who once ignored me or doubted my capability now deferred to my judgment. Quiet respect replaced the subtle dismissals of the first week. The woman who had fired me in front of everyone was now restrained, corrected, and observed under the very rules she once enforced freely. Her authority, once absolute in perception, had become fragile under scrutiny, and I had achieved it without a single raised voice or public confrontation. The final confirmation arrived in an email from HR. She was no longer allowed to approve contracts independently. My oversight ensured that her mistakes were caught before they caused damage. She sent a curt note attempting to maintain dignity, but it only highlighted her failure. The first-hour firing, meant to humiliate me, had instead revealed her vulnerability. And as I read the email, I smiled quietly, knowing patience, strategy, and precision had delivered justice far more elegant than revenge born from rage. Months later, the office dynamics had shifted permanently. I had earned trust, recognition, and respect. She avoided unnecessary contact, aware that any interaction could reveal yet another oversight. My patience, observation, and calculated strategy had transformed humiliation into authority. The first-day insult, the words "you're fired," were no longer a wound. They were the spark that ignited a chain reaction, culminating in her collapse and my rise. Today, I walk through the office with calm confidence. My first-day humiliation is now a story of strategy and triumph. She, who once held power, now moves cautiously, measured and uncertain. And me? I've learned the quietest, most patient moves often achieve the loudest victories.
She laughed, thinking she controlled me. Now, I am the one defining the rules.